Welcome to the video series, Informational Text Strategies for Under-Resourced Learners. One of the things that's happening with the state standards and state assessments, whether you use Common Core or a different set, is that the testing is getting more intense because they're asking students to go to levels of analysis of informational text that we've never asked them to go to. And many educators are uncomfortable with this. So this series is a set of tools you can use with students that actually work at middle and high school. The first thing that needs to be understood is that you're being assessed on both informative text and literary text. About 70% of assessments are informational text or informative text. So we are going to spend time there. The other item that needs to be mentioned is simply this. As students get into more sophisticated texts, they are actually a combination of literary and informational because they often embed stories, other kinds of literary things in order to enhance the experience for the reader. One of the first things you have to explain to your students when you start doing this is that an author or a writer always wants to manipulate their reader. When I taught 9th grade, I used to tell my students, you're a Mr. or Mrs. God, okay? And when you write, you want to manipulate the reader. Now, some people find that offensive, but that's actually the reality. And you want to do it to either one of the author's purposes: inform, entertain, persuade, influence, and some texts, particularly advertising texts, are a mix of all the above. When we work through this series, we are going to talk about these tools that you can teach students that authors use to manipulate the readers. And once students have these, they're better off doing it. The way I introduced the subject to 9th graders was this. I said to them, let's talk about the story of Cinderella, because they all know the story of Cinderella. And I said, so tell me, can we tell the story without the wicked stepmother? Well, there'd be a lot of debate in class about whether we could, and eventually the students would say no, because she's Cinderella's problem. What they already understood is that every literary text has a problem and a goal, and the problem that Cinderella has is she's oppressed, and the oppressor is the stepmother, the wicked stepmother. So then I would say to the students, can we tell the story without the fairy godmother? Well, they'd all go, oh, yeah. I'd say, okay. So how are you going to get Cinderella to the ball? Well, we'll have a magic wand. I said, is that any different than what the fairy godmother did? They go, well, actually, no. So I said, you have to have that role. It doesn't have to be a fairy godmother, okay? It can be the zap of a cell phone, okay, but the bottom line is you still have to have that role. Then I'd say this to them. If you have the wicked stepmother, why do you need the stepsisters? You could tell the story without the stepsisters, right? And they would argue with that, and finally they'd say, I said, look, you have to think about why the author needs the stepsisters. What do the stepsisters do for the reader? Well, they make you feel empathetic to the reader. The reader feels empathetic to Cinderella. And so they build empathy for the main character. Then I'd say this to them, all right, why the rules about the dance, the ball? You know, if she's not home by midnight, you know, and she didn't get home and the carriage turned to a pumpkin and the horses turned to mice. I said, why that? Well, they eventually said, build suspense for the reader. You think Cinderella's going to solve her problem, and she doesn't, okay? So she's back in reality. I said, okay. Now, why then do we have the shoe at the end? Why didn't the author, you know, just have Cinderella go to the ball, meet the prince, and be happy ever after? Why do we have to have this thing with the midnight strikes midnight, her whole carriage turns away, she ends up being walking home, you know. Then the prince comes around with the shoe. Why did the author do that? Well, we have a lot of discussion, and bottom line is the shoe is a metaphor. The shoe is a metaphor for movement. And a shoe is also something that's pretty much a particular individual fit. And he had the one shoe, the person had to bring the match with them. So it's a guarantee that he got the right woman. So in the story, there's two problems. One is to get out of the immediate oppression of the house and get to the dance. The second one is to get out of the oppression for her life. So the writer needs every character in that story in order to make it happen, okay? And when you understand that, how an author then uses characters and situations to manipulate the reader, then you begin to understand the craft and tools of writing. And we're going to look at it in informational text and literary text. We have divided this training into 4 parts now. Cognitive level 1 questions, which is what did the author actually say? Cognitive level 2 questions is what's the author's purpose and how did the author manipulate the reader? Level 3 is of the question is what specific tools did the author use to manipulate the reader? And level 4 then is the test questions that have you read multiple texts. And what you have to do when you read multiple texts is you have to synthesize them, you have to distill them, which means you take the essence out of it, and then you have to do a constructed response. And I'm going to give you a quick and dirty tool that will help you get a good constructed response out of students when there's multiple texts and they have to analyze them and then write a response using all the texts.